Institutions that survived their creators. They were built for a moment that passed, designed by people long forgotten. Yet long after their founders disappeared, these institutions continue to decide outcomes, allocate resources, and shape lives as if nothing had changed. To understand how institutions survived their creators, we must return to a Europe obsessed with permanence. Leaders knew their authority was temporary. Wars, elections, and revolutions guaranteed turnover. So they built systems meant to outlast them, rules, offices, and procedures designed to function without memory of who had created them. The first reveal begins with delegation. Power was embedded into roles rather than individuals. Decisions followed process instead of personality. Responsibility was distributed across committees, charters, and mandates. Once established, these structures no longer needed vision to operate. They needed compliance. The second beat followed as generations passed. New leaders inherited institutions already in motion. Changing them required effort, consensus, and risk. Leaving them intact required nothing. Inertia became protection. What had once been deliberate design slowly hardened into default reality. What made this powerful was legitimacy through endurance. If an institution had survived multiple crises, it was assumed to be necessary. Longevity replaced justification. Questioning structure felt reckless compared to working within it. Survival itself became proof of value. Over time, institutions stopped serving original intentions and began serving continuity. They adapted slowly, selectively, and often defensively. Their purpose blurred, but their authority remained intact. Power no longer needed creators. It had learned how to persist on its own. As the reveal deepened, endurance began shaping behavior more than effectiveness. Institutions learned that survival depended not on results, but on avoiding blame. Procedures multiplied. Accountability fragmented. Decisions were justified through process rather than outcome. When responsibility was everywhere, it was nowhere. The conflict emerged when reality shifted faster than institutions could adapt. Economic models aged. Assumptions hardened. Yet structures built for permanence resisted change by design. Updating mandates required consensus across layers designed to slow motion. The world moved. Institutions waited. The buildup intensified as crises exposed a gap. Emergency measures were routed through frameworks built for stability, not speed. Responses arrived late, cautious, and compromised. Survival was achieved, but often at the cost of relevance. Institutions remained standing while problems evolved around them. New leaders attempted reform, only to discover that authority was embedded deeper than personnel. Removing individuals changed tone, not trajectory. The institution's logic reasserted itself. Policies returned to familiar patterns. Continuity absorbed disruption. By now, an uncomfortable realization spread. Institutions that outlived their creators had also outlived their context. They were no longer answers to current problems, but artifacts managing new realities with old tools. Endurance had become inertia, yet dismantling them felt impossible. They held expertise, memory, and coordination that could not be rebuilt quickly. Criticism acknowledged their limits, but depended on their existence. Reform required them. Abolition required alternatives no one trusted yet. The system faced a paradox of its own making. Institutions had survived so well that they no longer remembered why they existed. And without that memory, adaptation became the greatest risk of all. The tension reached its peak when institutional survival began conflicting openly with public need. Outcomes stalled. Processes continued. Reports accumulated while problems persisted. The machinery functioned flawlessly, yet direction felt absent. What had once provided stability now generated frustration. The conflict sharpened as external pressure mounted. Citizens demanded speed, clarity, and relevance. Institutions responded with consultations, reviews, and frameworks. Each action followed procedure, yet none altered trajectory. Adaptation occurred at the margins while the core remained untouched. Survival instincts overrode purpose. The buildup intensified when internal assessments surfaced. Analysts warned that rigidity was no longer neutral. It produced bias toward existing structures and against emerging realities. Innovation bypassed institutions rather than reforming them. Parallel systems formed outside official channels, moving faster and taking risks legacy frameworks would not. Authority remained centralized, but influence began to leak away. Leaders faced an uncomfortable choice: force reform from within and risk collapse, or preserve continuity and accept decline. Most chose preservation, not out of malice, but caution. Institutions were too intertwined to fail cleanly. Stability had become hostage to its own success. Public trust eroded quietly. People sensed decisions were being managed rather than made. Accountability felt diluted by process. Change required navigating systems designed to resist it. Survival, once reassuring, now felt self-serving. By this stage, the paradox was undeniable. Institutions created to protect society had begun protecting themselves first. Longevity no longer guaranteed legitimacy. Endurance no longer implied relevance. The question was no longer whether these institutions could survive change. It was whether society could afford institutions that could not. The reckoning arrived not through collapse, but through redefinition. Europe did not dismantle the institutions that had outlived their creators. It confronted a harder task, forcing them to remember why they existed in the first place. The climax unfolded when mandates were rewritten with intent rather than inheritance. Purpose was clarified. Time limits were introduced where permanence had gone unquestioned. Review mechanisms gained teeth, not to preserve process, but to test relevance. Survival was no longer enough. Institutions were asked to justify themselves continuously, not historically. This shift changed internal behavior. Decision-making began orienting around outcomes rather than precedent. Adaptation was framed as responsibility, not risk. Some structures shrank. Others merged. A few disappeared entirely, not through failure, but through acknowledgement that their function had passed. Continuity gave way to evolution. The resolution emerged gradually. Institutions did not lose authority overnight, but they lost immunity. Longevity stopped being proof. Performance returned as currency. Public trust did not surge, but it stabilized, grounded in visibility rather than assumption. Systems once designed to endure learned how to change without unraveling. What endured from this chapter was a sober lesson. Institutions are tools, not monuments. When they forget that, they begin serving time instead of society. Survival becomes hollow if it outlives usefulness. Stability without purpose is just inertia wearing a badge. Europe's experience revealed something quietly powerful. The strongest institutions are not those that last forever. They are those that know when to transform. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.